Okay. Okay, so welcome, Ram. Can you tell us about your background and your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from the UK. I was born in England. My parents are of East Indian or South Asian origin, but I was actually born in the UK. As Val was saying earlier on, my mum took a drug called thalidomide. I don't know if you guys have heard of that drug or if you know much about it. Anyone? So I'll give a bit of background.
You can use your reactions, like your thumbs up. Let's all use our thumbs up things. If you have heard of it, it's a thumbs up. If you hadn't, it could be, I don't know what, a question mark. You have reactions on the bottom of your screen, by the way.
No worries. Anyway, I'll give you a bit of background information to what the drug was and what it was meant for, and then how it actually impacted people like myself. So the drug was actually given as a sedative for morning sickness, which is to basically ease issues around morning sickness. Some women suffer with it a lot more than others. So that was a reason it was given to my mum. But the drug wasn't tested properly. It wasn't actually tested enough before it was put onto the market in the UK and in Europe. So the impact of the drug varied on when the drug was taken during the early stages of pregnancy. So my mum would have taken it around the second and third week of her pregnancy. Some mums took it later on, which meant that limbs were affected differently. So mine, both my upper and lower limbs were affected. My disability, the medical term for it, is known as phocomelia, which means short upper and lower limbs.
Can you show them? We can't see them.
Yeah, I can see my arms there. My legs you can't see because I'm sitting under a desk. But anyway, so that's basically the disability that I have, that I was affected by thalidomide.
Did it sort of arrest the development as the development was happening almost?
What's that, sorry?
Like I think you explained it to me once, like your brain and heart developed and then your mom took it and then it kind of arrested
basically,
the development.
Yeah. So basically what happened with the drug was that as the fetus is developing in the womb, first thing that happens is the nerve ends all start growing, and then the fingers, the toes, the eyes, and so on start developing. So when my mum took it, what the drug did was it actually stopped the nerve ends from growing. So when my mum took it, the nerve ends on my fingers, my feet, would have been developing, and that's what basically the drug did. It just cut them off completely. So although I have fingers, they didn't grow fully. I don't have thumbs. My feet didn't develop properly. My legs didn't develop properly because of that. So, but everyone, like I said, the drug impacted people in different ways. It all depended on when the drug was taken by the mum. One of the things a lot of people refer to as victims, and I hate that word, victims. I do not like that at all.
Or people suffering from thalidomide.
Suffering, yeah. I like to say I was affected by thalidomide because that's what it was. I was affected by it. It wasn't, I'm not a victim. It's one of those things that happened. Yeah, admittedly, the drug company could have done a lot more, but it didn't, and I can't change that. So I didn't want to go through my life being called a victim. So I would say to people I was affected by thalidomide.
And you told me like they tried to give you legs and stuff for a while, but
I used to wear prosthetics when I was a lot younger, which basically, again, this comes back to one of the models, which is
our next question. So
yeah, this comes back to the medical model, which is basically looking at the disability as a problem and how to basically cure it, which is part of the medical model as well. So for them to cure my disability was to give me prosthetics, which basically slowed me down. I couldn't walk in them. I couldn't keep up with my peers. I couldn't join my peers in playing or in school properly and things like that. So really, it made me more of a person with a disability than if I was without any prosthetics. So yeah.
Yeah, and that is our next question. It was we've just learned last week about the moral and medical models.
Yeah.
And so it'd be nice to hear it from your perspective because we read our textbooks, but that's all we've gotten so far. So if you could explain those, that would be fabulous.
Right. What, the different
The
models?
different model and your
Right.
opinion of them, the moral and medical, and yeah.
Right. Well, I'll start with the model that I agree with, which I think is the one that fits me personally, and I would say that's the social model. I think that's the one that I would really agree with, because the social model is basically a society that creates a disability in a lot of ways. I mean, I can do most things already, but the things I can't do are the things that society has created a barrier for me. For example, if I want to go to a show which involves getting up a flight of stairs, it's not that I can't go to the show because I have a disability, it's the stairs that are preventing me from going to that show.
Pay for parking. Remember?
Parking, yeah.
It was
So,
too high.
yeah, that's a good way. Val and I were just talking about that a few moments ago. I drive, so if I'm at a parking meter, I can't reach a parking meter. It doesn't mean to say I can't pay because I've got a disability. It means that the parking meter is not accessible to me. So the social model is the one I agree with. It's not the person that can't be part of society. It's society that's not allowing them to be part of society. It's the environment that's not allowing people to be part of society. So that's why I think the medical model is the best one. Sorry, the social model.
Social model. Yeah.
Yeah, the medical model to me is quite a difficult one, because I think there's pros and cons to it. The pros being there are people that can be cured of certain illnesses and disabilities. So that's one of the things I think the medical model is positive. But then there are other aspects of it, which is basically trying to cure something, like we were saying, giving somebody prosthetics, which might not be the most practical or the realistic thing. But the medical model believes that socially you look better with legs and without legs. So I don't agree with that aspect of the medical model. And to always be constantly looking for a cure. Again, that's something else. I think, realistically, there are some things that aren't going to have a cure. I mean, my disability, there's no way it's ever going to get, I'm never going to be cured, so to speak. So why look at that? Why look at something that's never going to change how I am in society?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and we just watched a documentary in our class about dwarfism, and they're starting to have cures for dwarfism now. And one person with that disability was like, it reminded me of you. Like, she's like, this is how I am, and I'm not sick, and I like it. So it made
I mean, I've said it to people before. I mean, if I was given arms and legs, I wouldn't know what to do with them. I've never had them, so I wouldn't know what to do with them.
Have you ever? Oh, go ahead.
No, that was it really. Just I mean, that's a good example of a cure.
Yeah.
Like I'd probably end up more disabled with arms and legs than I am now.
Yeah.
Because I just wouldn't have a clue how to coordinate myself to walk or to pick up things or whatever. Because my brain has been, my brain has adapted for the last 60 years in a certain way, and now suddenly you're asking it to change.
Yeah, I mean, I was so thankful that you could eat nachos and drink beer, else I wouldn't have been able to hang out with you, right? When I was 20.
Well, those two things I would definitely find a way to do well.
But okay, so then the other model that we read about was the moral model. And so my question would be, have you ever had, in all of your short years of living, because you're quite young, right? Have you ever come face to face with that moral model? Like, I'm just curious. Have you? Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. Well, it's my background. My parents are of East Indian origin, so religiously, that religion would come into that, and the idea that for example, it's something that you've done wrong, the parents have done wrong, or you've been punished for something because you were coming back to the karma thing and so on. So yeah, I mean, I remember as a kid hearing all those things, and I felt more for my mum than anyone, because there's a huge guilt factor there for her, and my parents being religious, there was something that they felt they were being punished for.
Did you ever have a talk with her about it, like later on, as you understood
Later
that?
on, absolutely. I mean, I've said to my mum from day one that, from as as far back as I can remember, that nothing. This wasn't her fault. She took something that was given to her by the medical profession, and just like most people in those days, put their faith in the medical profession.
Well, and she was a new immigrant. She barely
Yeah,
spoke
exactly.
English.
Yeah, but that applies to whether she was an immigrant or not. I mean, a lot of the UK thalidomiders, their families are from the UK, and so I mean, I don't know how they feel, but I know a lot of them that I have spoken with would say the same as me, that you can't blame the parents.
No, of course
and the
not.
parents. I mean, my mum and dad, I think, lived with that guilt for most of their lives, and it's probably only now that they probably come to terms with it. And I know other people who I know from various thalidomide meetings that I go to have said the same thing. It's a guilt that their parents have lived with.
That's a
Even
hard
though it had nothing to do with them, it wasn't their fault.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one. So that's where the moral model for me just doesn't fit. It's obsolete in my view. It shouldn't even be a model, so to speak.
Yeah. And so basically, the next question, I think you said it does lead into the models, because you have a job right now that's, tell us about that job, because that actually leads into our readings for the next couple of weeks.
Right. So my job now, I mean, my background is working with youth. My background in the UK and when I came to Canada was working in youth counselling and youth support work. And that was where I worked for almost 25, 30 years. So a few years ago, I decided to change paths. And so now I work, I retrained through the Rick Hansen Foundation to look at accessibility assessments, which is what I do now, which again comes back to the social model of changing the environment to fit the needs of everyone. So one of the things I work with is something called universal design, which is basically looking at the design of the environment to fit everyone's needs. And it's not necessarily that, and that's the other thing with the job that I do now. We're not just looking at disability. Disability, in most cases, a small percentage of the barriers that are created in environment. You could look at somebody with a child and a stroller. There's barriers there. Somebody who's a senior who's got issues with walking, or somebody that's got invisible disability. Color blindness is another one as an invisible disability. So what I do, the job I do, when I'm not just looking at it from the point of view of somebody with a physical disability, I'm looking at it from a learning disability point of view, physical disability, people with kids, people with invisible disabilities. So we try and change the environment, and we try and change the environment to be inclusive. So for example, if I'm looking at a building where there's steps leading up to the building, I'm not going to try and look at access from a side entrance or a back entrance to the building. What I would be looking at is to look at how we can have a ramp or some sort of adaptation done, so everyone is going in through the front entrance, everyone is walking up those steps or using the same path to get to that building, as an example. Washrooms are another one. Instead of having washrooms that are specifically for people with disabilities or people with additional needs, have universal washrooms. So it doesn't matter who goes in there, everyone needs to use a washroom somewhere along the way. But everything within that washroom is done to a way that it's adaptable for everyone, not just individuals.
It's such a better mindset than like, oh well, they'll be fine, they can go around the back, or we'll carry them.
Exactly. So inclusivity is a big thing in the work that I do now. We try and look at things in a way that it's not going to make you feel different about using a building or a washroom, or going to a concert or whatever.
That's really important, I think. Because I mean, anyway, that's great.
Sorry, you're on mute, Val.
Sorry, I didn't realize everything. It leads right into our conversation about ableism because, but I was wondering if you have some other examples of what ableism is to you, because we've read the definition in the book, but we'd like to hear.
Well, yeah, I think from on a personal level, I've experienced it mainly. Two examples I can give, which I think would be most fitting to show how ableism can affect somebody. The first example is when I was looking to go to university. I'd applied to go to this one particular university that did the course I wanted. This is back in the UK, and they basically said they would like to take me on the course, but they couldn't because the building wasn't. It was an old building, and I wouldn't be able to manage in that building. So, because I really wanted to go there, I said, can I come down and have a look? Can I see what barriers are going to be there that are going to prevent me from doing this course? So when I got down there, the head of department, was showing me around, and sure enough, it was an old building, historical building. They had like 2 or 3 steps to get into the building. And then as he's showing me around, he said, well, your lectures would be upstairs. There's no elevator. They're on the 2nd or 3rd floor of this building. So as we're wandering around, I saw some rooms downstairs and I said, well, what are these rooms here? So he said, well, that's a different program. That's not your program. That's a different one. So, as we're wandering along, I said, well, if there's no one with a disability in that program, why can't they go upstairs and you bring my program downstairs? Such a simple solution. This guy's got PhD and blah, blah, blah. And when I said, well, why can't we do that? He said, well, let me check. And sure enough, I got on that program.
Oh,
it was
really?
if I hadn't have gone down there, but again, it's a long-winded way of saying it's a prejudice that existed. Well, we can't do anything here. You've got a disability, you can't walk, so we can't do anything. You can't join the program.
And you've also spoken to advocacy, because we can advocate for ourselves, but we can also advocate for others.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm not just speaking for myself, I think most people with disabilities are very good at looking outside the box to find alternative ways to do things that aren't going to cost, thousands of dollars to adapt, or but there's ways around it. And I think most people are able to do that. It's a skill that you have to develop.
Especially for us working with children in the school system.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like I think everyone here has worked in a caring role.
Yeah. And then the other example I was going to give you with regards to ableism and discrimination was the first job I ever got. Again, when I finished my degree, I was looking for work and I was applying for work, and I wasn't getting any responses. And I was applying for similar jobs to a lot of my fellow students. And they were getting interviews. They might not necessarily be getting the jobs, but they were getting interviews. I wasn't even getting interviews. So at the time, I sort of looked at my resume and realized I had one line in it, which was, I use a wheelchair. And that was the only difference between my resume and most of my fellow students' resumes. So I thought, okay, well, I'll take this line out and see what happens. And I started getting interviews. Just that one thing. So again, there was all this prejudice that people had built up by seeing the word wheelchair user, right? And I went for a lot of interviews, but obviously once I get there, once I get through the door, they see me as a person with a disability, and I look a lot more different than somebody with a spinal cord injury or somebody that has a disability where they still have all the limbs. So I look very different. So when I used to get to these interviews, I had a feeling most of the time, although I answered all the questions, had all the knowledge, I wasn't going to get the job. So the job I did get, by this stage, I was done. I was really done and frustrated and everything else. So I remember going in for this interview, and it was with what they call a building society, like a bank. And it was working behind the scenes. It was working in human resources. And I went in, met with this guy. I still remember his name. Keith Boothroyd was this guy's name. And we chatted about, things around HR and equal opportunities and all those sort of things. I was in there for a good, half an hour or so, hour. And at the end of it, he asked me one question, and he said, well, I just want to know why you didn't put the fact that you're in a wheelchair on your resume or your application. So I thought, I've got nothing to lose here. I've got absolutely nothing to lose. So I just turned around and said, well, would I have been sitting here talking to you for the last hour if I had to put it in? He never answered my question, but he gave me the job.
Yeah, that's bang on, I would say. Yeah.
But that was by that point, I was just frustrated. I just knew that, like, I've got nothing to lose by saying what I really think now.
I don't think there's time to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up really fast. I just want to tell my students, the guy picked up a hitchhiker and the hitchhiker was like so happy. And then the guy's running towards Ramesh and then he's like, he gets in the vehicle and he's like, and they're driving together and the guy's like,
yeah,
elephant in the room.
Well, this is in England again. He was actually a paratrooper, jumps out of airplanes.
Oh my God.
Like, and I could tell he was scared. So I asked him, I said, look, I've got a full license. I've passed my test and everything. And I said, I can't believe you're frightened of somebody like me when you jump out of an airplane. And when I put it like that, it sort of fitted in with it and he was fine after that.
Then you're fine. You had to kind of break
you remember more stories than I do.
I do. I love your stories. I just cling to those things. Yeah. So now we're going to switch a little bit gears to the education system that you experienced. And I realize there's a whole time and culture of difference between your childhood in England. But because most of us are going into some kind of caring role, some with adults, some with teens, but mostly with children. So if you can talk about your best experiences and the most positive influences that you had, that would be great.
Well, I mean, I started at a school which was for kids with disabilities. So I think that was a good starting point because the school allowed us to gain our own confidence, become independent a bit more and so on. And I was at that school until I was 11 or 12. And then I went to mainstream, into mainstream education, which was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because suddenly, you're exposed to other people who aren't people with disabilities. And you want to be like them, just like any kid wants to be. You want to be the same as your peers. Yeah. So that really helped a lot for me because it was suddenly this positive influence of, well, if they can do this, I want to do it. And, like friends of mine who are going up to college and things, well, I want to do that. Why can't I do that? And I don't want to stay at home to do that. They're going away and, they've got their freedom. I want my freedom. So I think that was a huge influence from an educational point of view. But if I hadn't have done the first stage, which was basically gain confidence just by being in an environment where there are other kids with disabilities and so on. But again, this is a very different time. I mean, this is, like I said, I'm 60 years old. So, you're looking at like the 70s and the 80s when disability wasn't a big thing. So going through that process of being at a school for kids with disabilities then into mainstream was a positive way to do it for me. Whereas now I think people with disabilities, kids with disabilities are exposed to a lot more at a lot earlier age. So for them to make that transition into mainstream education, I think would be a lot easier than it was.
Yeah, I don't even think we have an option other than mainstream education. No. Yeah, so there is deaf school, and we're going to talk about the importance of deaf school because deaf people say that they prefer to be in a school with other people like that have the same needs, right? So that's interesting. But like, do you remember how the teachers behaved? Were they all good?
Yeah, again, it was like in mainstream, it took a while, I think, for the teachers to adapt because again, they hadn't dealt with people with disabilities. So to them, well, how can you do this? Are you gonna be able to write? Are you gonna be able to,
drink beer and eat nachos? I guess they didn't say that.
Well,
I probably asked you that before I ever hung out with you. That's very important.
But yeah, so I think it was a learning curve, not just for me, but the school as well that I went to, because they hadn't had anyone with a disability before either.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Thank you. Someone added a question I hadn't read yet to this, but I'm going to read it to you anyways. I just noticed it. That's why I paused for a second. It was about since what the society calls the thalidomide, they're calling it a tragedy sometimes.
Yeah.
So what government funding and supports are in place that you know of to basically thwart that kind of thing, or to support people like yourself?
Right.
Is there any kind of like,
Yeah. I mean, there is. I mean, like, we were given compensation. I was given compensation.
there was a
Um,
class action, or what happened?
Pardon?
Was there a class action lawsuit
There
against?
was, yeah. Initially, it was a whole bunch of parents that got together and did a class action suit. This was in the UK. And then it was taken on by the government as well. They put some money into it, and the drugs company, Grunenthal, which is a German company, still even to this day hasn't admitted they were at fault.
And they
They
had
were.
more thalidomide issue in Germany than in
Yeah,
Britain.
yeah. I mean, thalidomide was a really interesting thing that came out at the time, because they were even, before they realized it was a drug that was causing the problem, they even put it down to chemical warfare, because the drug was being, that people were being affected in the West, but not in the East.
Oh,
So they thought, oh, well, the Russians have done something here, until it
oh,
started coming out that the drug was actually, because the drug wasn't distributed in the East. It wasn't, it's
why?
distributed in
Yeah.
Germany. Well, yeah, exactly. So
And it was only here for 3 or 4 months before it then.
no.
got
It
worse,
was
was it?
actually in the UK. It was given out in it started in 1960. Sorry, 1955. The drug was brought out in the UK and in Europe in general.
What about
Um,
in Canada? Canada
In
wasn't
Canada,
long.
Canada, it was brought out probably a bit later, but then it was here longer. So the drug was taken off the market in the UK in '62, the year I was born.
Okay.
But in Canada, it was taken off in '63. So when I've been to meetings, because I'm one of the younger ones in the UK, one of the younger people that are affected by thalidomide. But in Canada, there are even younger people than me that are probably just coming up to their late 50s now, whereas most of us in the UK are in our 60s now.
Do you think that that things have changed because of this
Yeah.
now? Yeah, like better
Well,
testing, or
I think so. But my wife Julie and I were talking about this a while ago. Like, if you look at things like the medical profession, a lot of tests and things on medication is still done on men. Very little is done on women.
that's interesting.
Yeah, like that. Yeah. So again, I mean, with thalidomide, one thing it did do was it actually made countries sit up and think about pharmaceutical companies and getting more information about what they've done on tests and things. So although it was seen as a tragedy in the number of people that were affected by it, the positive aspect, in my opinion, is the fact that it made governments sit up and think that before we let anything in, we need to know more about it.
Yes, and like hardcore testing. You
Yeah,
want to wait until people are having symptoms of something.
yeah,
We have a
exactly.
question in the chat, Ramesh. It
Yeah.
says, is it true that thalidomide is what shaped NHS in the UK for how it now passes drugs? What's NHS, Cassandra?
National Health Service.
Oh, national. Okay. Okay, there you go. Is it true
Uh,
that
Well,
it is
no, I don't think it's just the NHS. I think it's government policy now that, like, drugs have to go through a rigorous.
more rigorous?
Yeah, I mean, like in the States, it's not that, and I'm not sure what it would be called in Canada, but in the States, it's the FDA, the Food and Drugs
Yeah.
Administration. Yeah.
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 So
So
yeah, anything that's distributed medically has to go through the FDA, and I'm sure there's a similar body here in Canada that does the same.
yeah, I think there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, so I'm looking at the questions, and some of them you already touched on because you just answered them in a different order. What happened to you? Kind of described what happened to you after childhood. Like, you transitioned yourself because you're stubborn, right? Like, you're like, I want to
Yeah.
go to college, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
You know, do you have other stories where maybe friends of yours or people you knew from the other, like the school where you got to know other kids with disabilities?
Right.
Like, what's the other side of that for,
Um.
like, when you come out of the school, is there
Yeah.
ever a lack of support and people just don't know what to do, or what do you think?
I think in the UK it's set up. From my experience, it was set up quite well because the schools, because I'd started in a school for kids with disabilities. You're in the system when it comes to what needs you have and what
Yeah.
what services you need to access. So even when we're in mainstream, those systems were still in place. And for me, I mean, by the time I left school, I didn't need anything, so I just went up to university and then college and then university, and then I was on my own. But I knew of the services if I needed them. So, but I can't really speak for other people because everyone was different. Everyone had different needs, different abilities, different ambitions, different goals, and so on.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Okay, we already talked about the next one. So there's only one more, and then we might have time for questions. So what would you tell a mother like yours in a public setting when their child is pointing out your disability? Oh, I like this one. And saying, like, look at that man, what would you want? Like, what would you teach a child about how to react?
That happens.
Give us a story. You must have. Can you give us like 3 of the stories?
I can't think of any particular stories, but I was just going to say it happens a lot. Where if I'm going swimming, for example, or just out in public in general, and Julie is really good at spotting it more than I am because I've had it all my life, so now it sort of goes over my head a bit. But normally, if I see a kid looking at me or pointing, I'll say hi, just break the ice instantly. Hey, how you doing? And then I'll point something out about them. I'll say, hey, I like your shoes. That's a funky color shoes that you're wearing. Or, I like that hat, whatever. Just something to break the ice. And then I'll say, you've got a question. Would you like to ask me anything?
Good.
And then usually they'll either go shy or they'll just blurt it out, whatever they want to ask. Why do you have, why haven't you got arms and legs? As an example is one that I get asked, especially by really young kids. And my usual answer is, and I do have a story, which came up from yesterday. So my answer is that usually if it's really young kids, I'll just say, well, my arms and legs didn't grow like yours.
Yeah.
So that's why I have to use a wheelchair. And then I'll show them something with my wheelchair, like, the wheelchair I'm in now raises up and down. So I'll show them that and they'll be, fascinated by that. Or if I'm in my other wheelchair, if I'm getting out my car, I'll say, do you want to see how I drive my car? And just something like that.
And kids love it. Like Ramesh, both my kids have sat on your lap and then he lets the kids drive and it can go really fast, right? And his feet can kind of wrap around the baby. And so we just plopped my son on there and he zoomed around and it was super cute. But that's cool. Yeah, that's good.
So and parents, admittedly, parents don't know me.
Right, I did, but they
No, you did, but like if you're out in public and somebody's kid is pointing at you, they don't know how I'm going to react. So I can see them trying to turn the child's head the other way or, try and distract them. But I'll usually say, oh, no, it's okay. You can ask whatever you want. So that puts the parent at ease straight away. I mean, there's so many advantages to that. First of all, that kid's going to go away knowing that you're a person. You're not somebody to be scared of. You're not somebody that your parents are shunning you away. So that must be something bad.
Yeah, exactly.
That really helps. I mean, the example I was going to give you, a friend of mine, Mike, who I was at university with in the UK, his story just came up a couple of days ago because his kids are all grown up now. I'm supposed to be going to his son's wedding in the summer. But his son, when they were really young, his kids, I went over to their place one time for dinner, and we sat there having dinner, and Sam, Mike's eldest son, who was probably only about 5 or 6 at the time, he said, why have you got short arms and short legs? So as we were eating, I said, well, you know what? I didn't eat my vegetables when I was a kid like you. Right? So I said, really? I said, no, I didn't like vegetables. I just, that's why my arms and legs didn't grow. So anyway, a couple of weeks later, when I was talking to my friend Mike on the phone, he said, I've never seen Sam eat vegetables like this before. Like, he'll just have one more.
You messed with him.
But I wouldn't do that to a strange kid. It was a friend's kid who I knew. So I knew I could get away with it.
That is so funny. What a brat. Yeah, I think we can open the floor for questions. I'll start with Cassandra said, well, you can ask him, Cassandra, about the US. I will start with you and then we'll just put up our hands. You guys know how to use the reaction. Is that okay, Ram, to have questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, whatever.
And thank you for the organized part of this. I'm going to continue recording until 4:30 if that works for everyone, and then I'll just turn it off. So Cassandra, do you want to ask about anything? She didn't have her hand up, but she said she heard that the US was the only country that didn't allow it. Is that true? There she is. She's coming on.
Hi. Yeah, the US, yeah, their Federal Food and Drugs Administration wanted more information about it and so on, so they didn't let it into the States. But it's just come to light recently at the last meeting I was at in the UK with the Thalidomide Association. There were people in the States that were affected. I mean, we knew of that already because anyone in the 60s who had family in the diplomatic service or in the armed services, whatever, who were based abroad, they could access that drug in Europe. So they might have been given it. So that's the only Americans that were affected that we thought about at the time. But now we found out that the drug was actually in the States, but it was given to doctors as samples. And some doctors actually. So now there are people who are coming to light now that were affected by thalidomide, but not because it was a prescribed drug. It was a sample that was given to people by the doctors. So
is the active?
And just a side note to that about the American Food and Drugs Administration. The woman that ran it was a Canadian woman. Her last name was Kelsey, and she actually got the job as the head of the FDA by sending in a resume, but not telling them that she was a woman.
Because her name is Kelly.
Kelsey, Kelsey. I can't remember, but she was Canadian. She ended up as the head of the FDA, and she was the one that actually stopped the thalidomide drug from getting into the States at that time.
Nice.
So,
well done, Canadian.
Just a side note, just so you might be interested in that.
Is the active ingredient used in something else right now that you know of, or like, do you know anything about what happened with it?
The drug's actually being used for leprosy and certain forms of cancer. But again, this is a few years ago. I don't know if it still applies now. It's been given out in a couple of South American countries where what they were doing was it was given out. I think it was given either for cancer as well as leprosy. But what they were doing was on the drug packet, they had a picture of a silhouette of a woman clearly pregnant in a circle with a line through it.
Oh, like don't get pregnant?
No, that's exactly it. So the idea was it was to say, don't take this drug if you're pregnant.
Yeah, but it sounds like
the way it looked was like it's a contraceptive.
Oh my, no, because that'll.
So I mean, this was back in 2012 when I was at a conference in London that was brought up. So I'm sure that's changed now, but just an example of how easily that drug could just be taken and thalidomide. People being affected again. Yeah.
So Shaylin had a question, and it's in the chat, so I'm going to read it. What are your thoughts on the fact that it's still being sold in the market? Oh, we just covered that.
Yeah.
But now it also goes by a different name and is used for skin conditions and cancer. Yeah, so we kind of covered that. How do you feel about that?
I think if it's going to help people, great, absolutely use it. But it has to be given to people and monitored very closely. Who you're giving it to,
what's it for,
what information you're giving them, give them the full story so they can make an informed decision as to whether they want to continue taking that or not. It should be the individual's choice, but based on giving them the full facts as to what the consequences could be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about an educational, like most of us will be in the educational system. So do you have any like #1 advice for educational assistants that are going out there to work with kids?
I think look at kids individually. Don't just go by what the textbook's telling you to do.
Yeah.
That's basically it. I think that's the simplest thing I can say, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And focus on ability.
Yeah. Look at their abilities and yeah, just basically look at their abilities and encourage them.
Like, have you ever had anyone, because one of the chapters in one of the books I'm reading right now, it is about presuming competency. So did you ever feel like someone assumed that you weren't competent?
Yeah, a lot.
Well, I guess I assumed you couldn't drink beer and eat nachos with me, so I guess.
No, yeah. yeah, I mean, I got that a lot in school. Like, I remember going to see my careers counselor in school when I was getting ready to leave, and he said, I remember him saying that, oh well, maybe you could get like an office job typing or something, and that
Oh,
was it. That was what he thought I could do.
yeah, that's not enough.
No.
You get so bored. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else have questions? Oh, Cassandra? She put her hand up.
What?
I had a couple. Well, not really. More. The baby distracted me. I wanted to hear, like, Brown, we've talked so much about like how society is viewed you and stuff, but like, you know, you've obviously lived a very full life. What are some of like your hobbies? What do you do for fun? Stuff like that, because that I feel is just as equally a part of who an
Absolutely.
individual
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I do several things actually. I've got several hobbies. One of the things that helps me stay fit and I enjoy as well is swimming. I swim quite a lot, maybe 2-3 times a week. I do model making, so I like doing things. And again, it's something I enjoy. It's relaxing, but it's also there's a practical aspect to it. Sort of, you know, keeping my fingers nimble, being able to use my hands, and again, even with something like model making, I constantly have to think outside the box, because a lot of things like that you make require thumbs, like you using, you know, fingers and thumbs. Well, I don't have thumbs. I don't have all my fingers, so I'm constantly having to think about it, which is great because it helps me adapt with you know, to different things rather than just getting complacent with what I do on a daily basis. I just started. I just joined a bonsai club, so I've really always liked doing bonsai. I've always liked bonsai plants, so I've just joined a club. I've got 3 bonsais on the go at the moment, and again, it's a question of adapting some of the equipment that I need for cutting branches or, you know, taking leaves off. So I'll have to work on how I'm going to do that. So those are basically the 3 main hobbies that I have. Music is one I really enjoy as well. But yeah, I think that's about it.
I'm like, I can throw in there. We talked about it so early in the conversation too. When Ram and I first met, actually, it was about a year or 2 into our friendship.
Yeah.
Ram insisted that I go kayaking with him, and honestly, by that point, I didn't see disability really that much either. Like I never questioned that Ram could go kayaking. And yeah, basically, I tried to sleep in, and he was having no part of it. Like he would not leave the driveway.
Tell them
Like,
the truth. You weren't trying to sleep in, Val.
we are going kayaking, period. And we did go kayaking, and Ram can kayak just fine. He just does his thing.
Well, it's not that different from how I use my manual wheelchair.
Yeah, they don't know. I wished you could have had your canes.
Yeah, I
here.
know. I've been lazy today. I'm using my powered chair, but
Yeah,
I have a manual
describe it.
wheelchair.
Describe to them that you can't reach the wheels.
Yeah, so I have canes that I had adapted. So I basically push my wheelchair. I'll send Val a picture, so it might be easier to see it that way than try and explain it. But basically, it's like rowing a boat, but I'm rowing my wheelchair using canes to ground level. I push my wheelchair doing that, and that's a really good form of exercise as well. And like, I don't use my power chair outside the house mainly. I use my manual chair for yeah, anything outside the house.
And I wish I could have been there to see when you drove to Newfoundland, which is crazy. Anyways, when you drove to Newfoundland, you said the steep hills in St. John's, you were trying to get up the hill with that manual wheelchair. Tell them what happened.
Well, I ended up just like meeting people because they could see I was struggling most of the time, or I'd ask for help. I'm not shy to not ask for help. So, and one of the friends that I made from that, we're still in touch now, a guy called Mark. Yeah, he was helping me up the hill and we were chatting away. And by the time we got to the top of the hill, you know, he said, well, you know, meet me, you know, come over to my place for dinner with my wife and that. And with going to people's houses, again, it's something socially you have to really think about, because A, can I get in the house? Because if there's steps up or the door's narrow. B, the washrooms is another one that you always have to think. Yeah, that you always have to think about. So I can't meet you, you know, just in case I can't get in, because then it becomes awkward. Somebody's gone through prepping a meal and, you know,
Yeah.
tidying the house, whatever. So I just said, oh, let's just go out, you know, I'll meet you somewhere for dinner. So I met him and his wife for dinner, and they've been the best of friends ever since. They've been still really close friends.
Yeah, and you've traveled lots too. And I think that Sandra missed it when you said, so I'll just sum it up. But Ram like showed up super early because he's like super keen for Bruce Springsteen. And he was at a Bruce Springsteen concert. He ended up meeting Bruce Springsteen and getting backstage passes and everything else. Aren't you like best friends with the doctor of Bruce Springsteen now or something?
We're good friends. Yeah. Well, I'm going to a concert in February. Seattle.
Cool. Good job.
That's the only reason I want to go to the States. Sorry, go on. Anyway, no.
All right. My second question is my late grandmother, she was a midwife who trained at St. George's in London.
Right.
And she immigrated over to Canada and stuff. And it was that very small window that I actually, and because she got a job in McBride of all places, that she actually never saw any of the thalidomide babies because I asked her before her mind went. But I know that a lot of the babies that were born, often they, especially genitalia and stuff, would be affected on the very severe cases.
Yeah.
Do they know that like are people who are affected on different, and I know everyone was different, are some of the thalidomide people able to have children, or were they all sterile?
Lots of them have. Yeah, nearly everyone I know through the various thalidomide groups have got children. Some of them are grandparents now.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it affected people in, I think earlier on I was saying, it affected people in very different ways. And it affected people depending on when the mum took the drug, at what stage of the pregnancy. But you're right, there were people that were born with internal issues, genitalia issues, but I think that's a very small number of people that were. And again, it would have depended on when
it would have been taken very early on, I must say.
Very early on, yeah.
Because the way you described it to me when I was 20, I think you said the brains are pretty much early on, like first, right? And then the heart, and then the lungs, and then limbs. And it got you right at that stage, right?
At the stage with the limbs, yeah.
I know, because the thalidomide's always been something that's interested me. And I read that it was actually, they know, like a really small window that the drug had effect. It was like from like week 22 to week 31. It wasn't even a 10-week span. And that they've done the testing, and they now know, you know, this week was this week was this, you know, brain, eyes, and the limbs and your legs were actually, I guess, one of the last things to be affected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I'm going to stop recording. Anyone got anything they want on the recording before I turn it off? Everyone bye and thank you and all that. And Ram, or do you need to leave or?
I'm going to head out in a little bit if you don't mind. I've got another 10 minutes or so, and then I got to head out.
I'm going to turn off the